Welcome, everyone. My name is Katie Goen. I'm marketing manager at Alert Media, and I'll be your moderator today. We're excited to see so many people in the audience, and we do have a great presentation for you today, so we're excited to get into it. And in today's webinar, we're going to be picking the brain of crisis management expert Penny Neferis to find out how and why an all hazards preparedness plan has been successful at JetBlue. So with that, I will kick things off by introducing today's speakers. Penny Neferis is Director of Business Continuity, Disaster Recovery, and Emergency Response at JetBlue Airways. She actually joined JetBlue in July of 1999, and she played a key role on their startup team as one of their first employees. And just to touch on a few of her many accomplishments at the organization, Penny founded JetBlue's Care and Emergency Response Department and served as its first director. So she developed and implemented the company's emergency response plans, trainings, procedures, command centers, and the exercises themselves. And she currently leads a team of professionals to ensure that JetBlue is prepared to meet any business interruption, and has also successfully led crisis activations for the company. Recently, Penny was asked to lead the Systems Operation Safety Management System. So that's program development, implementation, management, the whole 9 yards. And I'm sure she'll tell us more about that in greater detail during our discussion. Hi, Penny, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me today. Great to be with you all.
Well, we're certainly glad that you're here. And I also want to welcome Peter Steinfeld. Peter's been involved in the emergency communications industry for more than 20 years now. He's the Senior Vice President of Safety Solutions at Alert Media, where he works closely with a wide range of organizations to support their employee safety, business continuity, and emergency preparedness initiatives. He's also the host of the Employee Safety Podcast, which is our weekly podcast series here at Alert Media. And some of his recent interviews include conversations with leaders from FEMA, Salesforce, Boeing, and many more. So you'll definitely want to check that out. Hi, Peter. Thanks for being here.
Oh, so great to be here. I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to quickly touch on today's agenda. First, we'll talk about Penny's background and what it was like for her being a key member of JetBlue's startup team. We'll talk about JetBlue's All Hazards Crisis Management Plan and how the company tests, updates, and evaluates it. We'll discuss the importance of communication and why that's a critical component to JetBlue's planning process. We will get into some real-world scenarios of how they put the plan into action. And then finally, we'll go over some best practices and advice to improve crisis preparedness and management at your organizations. So first thing I'd like to do is go ahead and launch our first poll. So if you could just take a moment to fill out the question on your screen, which is, which of the following best describes your familiarity with the all hazards approach to crisis management and preparedness? So is it my company uses an all hazards approach? Maybe your company uses event specific plans. Maybe you're unfamiliar with all hazards planning and you'd like to learn more about that. Or none of the above. Maybe none of these apply to you or your organization right now. So I will go ahead and give this just a few more seconds. If you could go ahead and get your responses in now. What I'm going to do is end the poll and then share the results so we can kind of just all get a feel for where the audience stands currently. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now and share. Wonderful. Can everyone see that okay? Perfect. Yep. So it looks like, a pretty healthy portion is already using an all hazards preparedness approach, but we also have a good healthy number using event specific plans and that just want to learn more in general. So let me go to you first, Penny. Is that surprising to you at all? The results you're seeing?
Not at all. I think it's great to see what everyone's up to and how they're, having a combination, which is kind of what we have, a hazard approach as well as some specific plans.
Gotcha. And what about you, Peter? Is this about what you expected based on your conversations with industry leaders out there?
It did. It seems to fall in line. It's about 50-50 usually that I see out there using the all hazards approach versus event specific plans. And then those, of course, using a combination.
Gotcha. Perfect. Well, let me stop sharing here. And then what I'm going to do is stop sharing my screen now. And that way I can turn it over to you, Peter, and you can get into it with Penny. And then just a heads up, though, I'll be chiming in here and there just as more live questions come in from our audience.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Katie. Really appreciate it. And Penny, so great to see you. Thanks for being here with us today to share all of your thoughts and ideas with the audience. And I've got a really big list of questions to ask you, and quite a few of them actually were submitted in advance by the audience. So I'm going to mix the two together as it makes sense in the context of our discussion. And of course, Katie, as she said, is going to interject with any live questions that come in over the chat too. So please send those in, and we'll integrate them as we go through. But just to get started, let's lay down some context here. Can you tell us just a little bit about your background specifically, and then more specifically, your role at JetBlue?
Sure, Peter. It's great to be with you guys today. So my background, I studied aeronautics and safety for school back during college, long time ago, and specialized in airplane accidents. So crisis has always been a passion of mine for many years, and didn't even realize that you can do it as a career. So I joined JetBlue back in 1999. I was working for a consulting firm and in Manhattan, and they mentioned, hey, there's a new airline starting like 10 floors below us. And I just hopped out of the elevator, started chatting with the folks. We didn't have a plane, didn't have a name. And I was like, where can I sign up? So I was lucky to be part of the JetBlue early on. We hadn't even picked Boeing or Airbus when I joined. So for me, though, the benefit of that was that I did have a clean slate. And I had joined the safety team to help us get certified because I had just worked for the FAA a few years back during college to get as an internship. So I knew all the inspectors that were going to be certifying us, and it helped to move the process along, and then was able to help write our manuals. And it probably was about 2 years in where we decided, hey, emergency response or crisis management overall, maybe even a little sooner. It was literally right before 9/11 that we dedicated a whole department to this early on. It is regulated in our field with regards to airplane emergencies. So we did put up an emergency response team early on.
Yeah, it's unlike a lot of industries. You actually come to the table having to have a baseline of emergency preparedness, or you can't even operate as a business. So that's perhaps a little bit different. But still, I think you'll probably share this a little bit later. It's always a struggle to get the organization to invest in expanding out the role of continuity and emergency response and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, what's not regulated is business continuity. So airplane emergencies are regulated, but business continuity is not regulated. So it did take us a little bit of a while to get to that point where it's like, no, we're responding to hurricanes no matter what. Let's put some structure around it. So so that didn't happen until 2014, where we actually formed our business continuity group as well.
Okay. And how many employees does JetBlue have today? It's grown quite substantially.
Yeah, so we're about 22,000 and growing. And serving about 100 different cities, over 30 international destinations, and we just crossed the pond. So that's a big accomplishment for us heading over to London.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Excellent. And where's JetBlue headquartered?
We're in Long Island City in New York, just right at the foot of the 59th Street Bridge is our headquarters. And then our focus cities, consider like our hubs are JFK, Boston, Orlando, Fort Lauderdale, LA, and Puerto Rico, San Juan.
Okay, excellent. I think that's great context. I appreciate you providing that.
Sure.
Well, let's start by talking about JetBlue's approach to emergency preparedness and your crisis response plans. So as a safety leader, what does all hazards mean to you? And I would say, in your opinion, why is the all hazards approach crucial to emergency preparedness and response?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, Peter, I think it goes hand in hand with some crisis planning, right? We know you may have an active shooter situation, you may have a hurricane that impacts your cities or headquarters. So the all hazard piece of it is what haven't you thought of? And so having that structure in place is what's really important, because we don't know what that next crisis will be that's going to happen. And, I think back to 9/11, we didn't have, terrorist attack plan or something to that nature.
Right.
But what we did is take that infrastructure that we built of a command center, command and control, having a leader, having open bridge, having communication, identifying action items, making decisions quickly, making sure you're taking care of humans. That's the most important priority, taking care of the people. That allows you, having that structure in place and having those people that know they need to respond and make decisions is really what can get any company through any of it. I think if you don't have that, then you don't know who's calling the shots, who's leading the group, where do they report, and so it doesn't matter what that crisis is. I mean, whether or not we built a plan for it or not, you've got that infrastructure there ready to go.
Yeah, I think that is the phrase, the plan is nothing, the planning is everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And a key compartment part of that is testing those plans, right? So you can write them, but if they're sitting on a shelf for 20 years collecting dust, they're really not that effective. And so making sure you're pulling them out as well with that group to test them. Our team, most recently, obviously, we've all been in pandemic mode, but we've talked through that scenario several times. So it wasn't strange for them that I was asking them to buy supplies and PPE equipment early on. They weren't surprised by that, because that's what we've talked through.
Yeah. And I think part of the all hazards approach is just to be ready for anything that could come your way. So it does take a lot of creativity. And one of the questions we got from the audience prior to the session starting was, how do you remain curious and diligent when developing an all hazards plan, especially if, quote, you don't know what you don't know with some things?
Yeah, I definitely think that as we see a few things that play out. One is what's going on in the news, what's going on in the world. Like when you hear of an earthquake with a tsunami, nuclear and power outage, it's like, could that happen to us? I don't know, should we talk through that? So I think a little bit of is seeing what's happening out there, whether it's a cyber attack, whether the internet goes down, like what could possibly happen, and seeing what people are concerned about. What are they talking about in the news? Seeing what's happening to other companies. But again, I go back to, if you have that core group, that core structure of command and control, and bringing leaders together to help drive you through that crisis, that you will get through it. Having your comms people there, having your, leaders, your business leaders there, it's important. And then pushing out those communications, whether it's internally or externally.
Yeah, without a doubt. We'll definitely spend time on that. To me, it's all about muscle memory. And that's why it goes back to the plan is nothing, the planning is everything. Just by going through exercises, get you familiar with it. And then you'll know how to react on the fly when something pops up, which is so crucial.
Absolutely.
Well, as it relates to emergency prep, can you tell us about how your team and your broader organization are structured?
Sure. So I sit under the Senior VP of Operations, and the System Operation Group is responsible for running the airline day to day. We are the heartbeat. We're the ones that build all the flight plans. We track the planes in the air. If there's a mechanical in the air, we're the group that's, helping guide that plane and pilot through. We are also the group that's responsible for the crews being there, and if there's customers misconnecting or anything like that. So really, it's the jigsaw puzzle that we put together. And so I love sitting under operations, because for me, what I have taught the operational group is you guys run the good days. You run every day, but when a bad day comes your way, you call on us, and we're going to come in, take it off the floor. You guys still need to run the rest of the airline, take it off the floor, and we will run it from the command center, which is literally located right next door to our ops center. They do see us as part of the operational group. Like, again, we're the ones like, put the capes on, come in, take it off the floor. You guys keep running the airline. We've got this crisis that's happening in LA, in, Fort Lauderdale with an active shooter, whatever the case is, you focus on the rest of the flights. And so it really has worked out well for us that we're not, we're seen as part of the business. It's just a critical part of the business, and we need to be there.
That's a fantastic approach. People should know that when an emergency happens, that there is a group that can swoop in to help so they can keep doing what they're supposed to do. And then they know that someone else has their back for this particular situation. That really is what keeps the business running. It's the continuity.
Absolutely, 100%. That's what we're trying to get through, right? Every day as curveballs come at us, just keep plugging away.
Yeah.
I'm going to chime in really quickly. Someone would like to know, how has JetBlue included people with disabilities who are employees, clients, and contractors specifically in your all hazards preparedness plans and activities associated with it?
Great question. So I would say specifically for our headquarters, we're also in charge of the evacuation plan for our ops center and the building. And we do have a few employees who are in wheelchairs. And so they are critical as part of testing with us and capturing those plans. But that's actually a really great question that I would try to go back and ensure that it's covered everywhere else as well. And even for terminal evacuations or anything like that, that's incredibly important.
And then, sorry, Peter, to usurp here, but someone wants to know, you mentioned testing your plans. How often do you test, update, or reevaluate them?
Sure, great question. So we do quarterly tabletop exercises with our crisis management team. We also run department-specific plans, especially if we have new leaders that are coming in and don't know how we operate in a crisis. And we also run company-wide exercises. So the quarterly tabletops are the ones that we will take out a plan that maybe we haven't tested in a while, or something that's happening. We were concerned with potentially our employees or our crew members potentially protesting against the vaccine mandate that was implemented. And so we tested that in our last tabletop to just talk through the scenario. Those plans, again, it a little bit depends on what's happening in the industry. A little bit also depends on, have we not talked about this in a while? What we also been doing lately, I would say in the past year and a half, 2 years, we've been throwing in some other things, like a hurricane's happening at the same time in Florida while this is happening in Boston. So just challenging the team with 2 different plans. The plans are, when we do a tabletop, it is an unannounced scenario. So they'll know the exercise is happening, but they don't know what the scenario is going in. And then we hand them out or email everyone the plan and say, right now is your time. You need to make the updates. We're going to start asking you some tough questions. And here's a time when you realize, oh, I'm missing that information. So it's kind of a real-time update to the plans. Everyone has their checklist. They'll send them back to us and then we'll update them, as we receive them. But the plans, do get reviewed at a minimum once a year. We are required to do that. And then they get republished. Our company-wide full-scale exercise, that's really for airplane emergencies, that's done once every 2 years. And we have close to 600 participants in the company involved in that. And it takes us about 6 months to plan one of those. It's like our big production for sure.
Yep. Someone asked a question about accreditation. They said, I'm curious if you're following an emergency management accreditation program for your response and recovery plans. Seems that they're trying to create something similar and they want to see what other companies have developed.
Yeah, great question. So our industry, the airlines in the US, we have legislation to follow. So it's the Family Assistance Act. If you go to ntsb.gov, which is the National Transportation Safety Board, within there, you'll find all the information around the requirements of the airline for a response. So it's not necessarily, we don't get accredited. We do submit a plan saying that we will comply with the Family Assistance Act. However, it's up to the carrier on how you choose to implement it. We don't get any accreditation. The folks on our team will go through different training and certifications, but the program itself isn't.
Okay, fair
enough. I think we have, sorry, Peter, we have time for one more question in this section. So let me get to this one from the audience. What are your thoughts on dedicated incident commanders?
That's what we have. So
very good.
So
we like them.
I support it. So our incident commanders, there's, I want to say 6 of us. I'm actually one of them as well. So it's my boss and our operation directors. We're always like on call. We're all New York based. We will always have one around in the event we have to activate. And we all will rotate during exercises on who's going to lead it. However, if our senior VP is in town, he will lead it no matter what. So, and then we'll alternate for overnight shifts. Typically our staffing will be, our SVP and one other director next to him, just to guide him through and help him out. And then the evening we'll also staff it with 2 as well if we go 24 hours. So yeah, we're huge fans. You definitely get their memory muscle going and they get stronger and confidence and they realize like, oh, that didn't work last time. Let's do it this way. You also learn, they all are a little different on how they want to run the command center as well. Sometimes they'll want to see, hey, what the cancellations are and put that up on a screen, and others want to see the weather map, so our team is very flexible in how we support them as well, but we are 100% on board with having that.
It looks like Mark had a follow-up question too. He said, thoughts on incident commanders also being members of the CMT, the crisis management team.
Yeah, that's the same. So the same leaders who would get us through an emergency response for an aircraft accident are the same leaders who get us through a crisis management org. So let's just say it's a cyber event. The operational directors are the ones that are going to bring everyone together, do the command and control. The cyber team may be leading the discussion, or security team during an active shooter leading the discussion and having the most to say, but it's still the operational directors that will run the command center room.
Very good. Katie, am I supposed to move on?
Yeah, let's get to some communication questions for Penny next.
Okay, fantastic. That's actually my favorite part, as everyone knows if you've listened to my podcast. I mean, in my opinion, it's one of the most crucial parts of the overall equation when it comes to crisis planning and response. So with that in mind, can you walk us through how you communicate during a crisis, both internally and externally, from start to finish? Not at the detailed level, but at a high level. What's the framework that you use, the structure and the flow?
Sure. So it depends a little bit on the event and where it's taking place. So if I take something that maybe is a smaller impact, let's just take the concert that just happened over the weekend, and knowing we have employees that live in the Houston area, we'll jump on our alert media tool, do a geomapping, figure out who lives in the area, and send an alert to make sure nobody was at the concert. When we did that for the Vegas concert shooting that happened, it turns out we had several people there.
Wow.
And so we even had a supervisor who was shot, and she thought it was just, a scratch, until she finally went to the doctor and realized there was a bullet lodged in her neck, and she had no idea for 3 days. So,
Wow.
but again, we immediately are able to tell, okay, I'm tracking these 3 people, making sure they're okay, getting the support they need. When we had heard she was at the concert and was injured, we immediately will sign what we call a care team member to be there with her and support her through it and make sure that she's okay. So yeah, as you can imagine, there was obviously been trauma with, finding out later on it was a bullet, and getting her in touch with the right authorities. But so on the smaller events, we will, whether it's fires or evacuations, we'll jump in, we'll geomap, we'll send an alert out. Our staff loves it. In fact, the word will get out and folks will get upset, like, well, why didn't I get a call? Maybe your information isn't updated, or maybe you didn't update your profile. So people, our staff loves getting the alerts. They call it, our program, we have over 1,500 care team members that are trained on how to respond in a crisis, and they'll just say, oh, the care team's calling, this is great. So that has worked well. Now let's talk about a bigger event. Let's talk about, the active shooter in Fort Lauderdale, major operation for us. Terminal next to us is being dumped on the ramp. All the customers are coming onto our ramp. It's just mad chaos. Not getting super clear direction on what's happening. The roadways are closing down. Crew members are going into, hiding and sheltering in place. So we were constantly sending alerts out, like, are you okay? Are you in Fort Lauderdale? Do you need assistance? I will say one of the things we learned from that one was we didn't ask, are you sheltering in place? And it wasn't until the debrief that we found out there was about 7 IT guys hiding in a closet for hours. And they're like, I was like, you were? And they're like, well, wow. I'm like, maybe we should have asked, like, are you sheltering in place in the terminal? You know, I mean, they said they were okay, but like, we didn't know they were hiding. So we've definitely learned from these events too. We will also use the tool to activate our command centers, right? So when we saw that happening, immediately we're sending out blasts. We're activating our crisis management team. Every department must have a representative who joins on the call to report out on behalf of their team. First call starts at this time. And so that also triggers our response as well. So there's 2 types of comms going on internally. With regards to checking in on our staff that's impacted, as well as activating our crisis team internally. Obviously, our communications team also comes to the table, and they will be pushing out messages as well as, you know, accommodating our customers, or potentially, you know, a press release if needed, or statements on Twitter or Facebook as needed as well.
Okay, great. And do you communicate with other businesses in the industry or even outside to learn from them and to help you develop a stronger crisis plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So the airline industry, we are a small knit group. And when it comes to crisis, there's no competition.
Yeah.
Like, we're not competing, you know, on who responds to this airplane emergency better. You know, if there's tips and tricks that we can share with each other. And believe it or not, Amtrak is also part of our group because there's really no one for them to network with.
Oh.
So Amtrak will always join our calls. In fact, we just had a call last night, and one of the carriers who had an emergency landing with a slide evacuation recently shared all their lessons learned. So it really, I'm really lucky to be part of this group. And, you know, we have just great friends in the industry that will share.
Very good. Looks like we have another question here. They said, how expansive is alert media in your roughly 22,000 person workforce? Can you communicate with all of them if they provide personal data?
100%. Yep, they're all, and international, you know, and we've also used it for our international cities. So a lot of our international cities are business partners. So if they give us a spreadsheet with phone numbers, and we know Barbados is going to get hit with a storm, we'll preload that team in there, because we're not getting a feed from them. They're not in our HR system, but we can add them in, and then we check on them as soon as the storm passes. So yeah, we send the alert to anyone and everyone that will put their information in there. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
And look, we have time for about one more question in this section. So I'm just going to chime in because I think this is such a good one. How do you communicate or approach leadership, Penny, to get them to commit resources for business continuity or for crisis management planning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I know it's tough with what all the companies have gone through with pandemic and cutting heads. So, you know, even for us, we were a team of 10 to 12, probably at our biggest. We had all our analysts took the buyout packages. So it was just the managers and myself left behind. And so we did, you know, convince leadership, like, hey, this is a priority. And they were like, absolutely. We backfilled a lot of our heads. We just got 4 new analysts in the past 2 weeks join our team. And so I think the big thing with senior leaders, one practice I always have is the minute they join the company, I meet with them within the first 2 weeks and talk about our organization and our structure, and like kind of get their buy-in early on as to like, here's how we're set up. And here's who you're from your team that's engaged and involved. Second is, you know, briefing out. So when we do activate and there is a crisis, you know, how are you reporting up to senior leaders as well? How are they seeing the benefits of what you've put in place and your activations have provided? So that's really important. In fact, my senior leaders end up coming into the command center. So they're all there. Like, it's, you know, no pressure. No, but they're super supportive. They're very supportive. When we plan exercises, we have a tabletop for our aircraft emergency with our emergency command center. in December, and all senior leaders are coming from CEO to president. They will all be there. So that sets the tone early on that they take it as a priority, and that then definitely cascades. But I guess I'm really lucky in that we set that up early on. Like, I didn't have to do any convincing. I just had to keep it going. And so that's really, really important. And I would also say one of our, I guess, best practices that we do is that when a crisis is happening as well, we do communicate out to the front line. So our staff throughout the whole company, so that they know what's happening as well, and they're not left in the dark, and also understand the importance of the emergency that's at hand. So whether it's an emergency flight and here's what happened, and why don't you give kudos to the crews that, did a great job, or, we're sorry for the loss of one of our staff members, here's what's happened, we'll communicate out as well to the front line.
Yeah. And Katie, you mind if I ask one more question? It looks like this is a good one from Rick that just came in.
Yeah, let's do it.
It kind of goes in what you said before. There's no competition in a crisis. So you interact with other competitors in the industry. And the question is, do any of the IT teams interact with other airlines for their DR approaches? And if so, how did that get orchestrated to get started? How do you start that talking to your competitor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that gets shared as much. It's probably a little bit more high level. Obviously, anytime we have a crisis, the airlines are in the news in a heartbeat. Websites down or something's crashed, we're in the news because it puts the whole operation in a tailspin as well. So we may, from that aspect, like, it's one thing to have emergencies with people. It's another thing to have an emergency with your business, that's like core to your business. And so we'll hear maybe high level what played out or transpired. A lot of times we are so dependent on other providers. There's so much that makes an airline work, that just in the operations alone, we have like 99 different systems that we count on to keep the, ops center up and running. So, so it's from that aspect, it'll be maybe a little bit more restrictive on what is shared. But from the human side, we definitely share a little bit more.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's talk about some real life scenarios. Can you give us maybe a few examples of crises that you and your team planned for or have faced, and how you applied your emergency preparedness and response plans and what the outcomes were?
Yeah, so I'm going to share one that happened recently that, we ended up, this is a little bit about alert media today, and I just want to share how the tool really came in to help us with this particular scenario. So you likely all remember there was a building collapse down in Miami, Surfside. And in that building, so when we saw the building, we came into the office and our security advised us, hey, there was a building collapse that happened. There's a lot of deaths. So we said, all right, we're going to take a geomap. Let's look at the tool and see how many people live there. And immediately it popped up about 4 of our, primarily, believe it or not, our flight attendants lived in that area. So we immediately sent an alert out. We heard back from 3 and we could not track 1 down. I'm like, what's going on? Somebody call our emergency contacts, text her. Maybe she's flying. Is she flying in the air? No, she's not flying. And then we finally said, somebody check her address. And we checked the address. We look on the map and it's like smack in the building, and she passed. She was on the 13th floor and didn't make it. And it was tough because it was like, oh, like, wow, that hit us hard. Like, we weren't expecting that.
Yeah.
Coordinated response with her daughter out of Seattle to help get her and her husband down to Fort Lauderdale. And then we also do the community outreach. So we set up in the Family Assistance Center and offered free flights to all the victims of the building, as well as anyone who lost their home. So our team, sets that all up. But I guess to us, it was, what tools do you have in place to help you be successful? Because really early on, it didn't take us days to figure it out because she didn't show up for a trip. It took us, I would say even within hours, a few hours to be able to determine that we had somebody in that building early on before the authorities, even knew. So that's one that was recent and, really tragic and hit us hard. For let's see, I would say for airplane emergencies, right? Well, that's what we do. We're an airline. If an emergency plays out, I think about my wonderful team in Nassau, Bahamas, but they've had 3 emergency landings because the planes will divert there. They're phenomenal in their response, but when we see that playing out, obviously the ops centers are way more in tune. Like, we're not waiting for the media to tell us something's happening. We know something's happening. A plane's going somewhere they probably shouldn't be going because there's an emergency. The pilot is, diverting and communicating with our dispatcher. And in those scenarios, there's a lot of coordination with the city on site, as well as with activating our command center and getting them the support they need, getting a relief flight in, taking care of the customers, rebooking them, offering them hotels, even setting expectations. Like, you're not going to get your bags for a few hours. The authorities have a plane. Like, we can't get to the plane. So really, from that aspect of it, aircraft emergencies, it doesn't happen often, but it definitely is going to be in the media. There's a lot of people impacted, and it's, chances are a small city. It never, knock on wood, happens at JFK or Boston where we have thousands. It's going to be in a smaller city, and they, you got to get them through it. And then I would say another scenario that I feel like we're constantly faced with over the past few years is just hurricanes and how intense they are and the impact they're having. And where for us, I'll look at Puerto Rico and what played out down there with Hurricane Maria. We have 450 employees that live on the island. We flew in, we were one of the first carriers there the next day. And I was also there early on, and just to see the devastation that played out. And so before the storm hits, we send out alerts like, are you evacuating? What are your plans? So we know who we're tracking. Like, if a lot of them have left, then we're tracking the 200 that stay behind. Then once the storm passes, we're checking in on them and saying, are you okay? Do you need assistance? Is your home damaged? Are you hurt? And we're trying to get information from them and really deciphering the results that we're getting in. For Hurricane Maria, obviously everyone lost power. Everyone, had damage. I mean, it was like nothing I had ever seen. I couldn't believe it was a hurricane that did such devastation. It felt like it was much worse. So in that case, we did prioritize based on the results we were receiving from our alert. Because everyone was in crisis. So 450, who do you help first? And so we did prioritize with, if you had somebody elderly with you, if you had somebody sick with you, or small children. And that was the group or complete home loss. So that was the group that bubbled up to like a code red for us. And we took care of them first, like even sending folks to the homes to get them out, our security team, to get them out, to get them to a safe place, whether it was a hotel that had power or we flew them out to the US. We also pay protected our folks. They didn't have to come to work. They all came. They wanted to be part of the recovery and, do something and not be at home, stressed. So provided meals and all that for our staff as well. Our next category was severe damage, loss of power, loss of water, so it just helped prioritize for us. But and then at one point we were doing daily check-ins, just sending out alerts. We ended up having about 4 of the 450 that we could not get a hold of, and we did have to send corporate security to their homes to track them. And they literally were like, no power, no nothing, no phone charge. Like, they're like, I don't know how to communicate to anyone. So they would go out with satellite phones. If they wanted to be evacuated, we would take them out as well.
That concept of triage, I think, can be really helpful, because when you're in the middle of a crisis and when it just starts, it's overwhelming. It's like, what do I do first? And being able to quickly communicate with your audience to understand, based on some very simple responses, how bad is it for you? You can then categorize people and then adjust your response accordingly. I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, we have found that, in some cases, just looking for a response that says I'm okay is not enough. Our pilot group is always going to say they're okay. Like, they never ask for help. And so
Stoic.
If I can ask for specific questions like, do you not have power and have a leak? Then
okay.
we might
We're
select
okay.
that option. So yeah, we've learned to get a little bit more specific in our questioning, so that we can get more specific responses.
That's actually a really good point, because people don't always think like you think. And you have to remember that, like pilots specifically, they're trained to not freak out if both wings are on fire, right?
Yeah, like, we got it. I'm good. It's all right.
Yeah, we'll take care of this.
I'm fine.
That's a very important point.
Yeah.
Someone asked a quick question. They just said, how large or how many number of people is on JetBlue's core emergency management and business continuity team?
Okay, so on my team is about 10 that we do this full-time planning and exercise. So we do the planning, the writing, the planning, working with the departments, the exercises, and the response. So we do the full picture. Our crisis management team for business continuity events, so everything but an aircraft emergency, there's about 60 people on that team. And so think, each department has 2 or 3 assigned to it. And then our emergency response for the company-wide, for airplane emergency, our command center alone has about 100. Our GO team that launches to the scene is about another 100. And then in the company, we have close to 1,500 trained in the care team, so that they could respond as well. So it's close to 2,000 that would be part of emergency response. But that care team I talk about, there was 50 of them. It wasn't an aircraft emergency, but it was Hurricane Maria, and I needed them to help Puerto Rico. So 50 of them deployed to Puerto Rico and were helping hand out food or whatever it was needed, whatever they could do to help out, work the flights because there wasn't enough staff. So yeah, we use those care team members pretty frequently.
Yeah. And that's a big team. Just a final question to round that out. It seems like you really have to have a culture of safety in emergency preparedness in an organization. So how does JetBlue go about empowering its employees to play a really active role in their own safety? Because ultimately, you got to take care of yourself until the cavalry can arrive. So how do you guys do that? Yeah,
so JetBlue has 5 values: safety, caring, fun, integrity, and passion. And so safety is number 1. We ingrained that day one. We have to be, we're flying $1 million aircraft with people on a plane. So safety is top priority. With regards to preparedness, we really focus, like a lot of other companies. Preparedness Month is when we really push out a lot of initiatives in September. And we'll do contests like, hey, who wants free tickets if you show us your kits at home? Send us a picture, you'll be entered in for a raffle. Take a picture of you and your family doing an evacuation drill at your home. So we try and make it, fun. We'll give them away during Preparedness Month. We'll buy Red Cross kits and say, we're going to raffle one every week if you do the following or complete this survey or watch this video. So it's really important. We also have, what's key to our program that I haven't mentioned yet, is at every single city, so our 100+ cities, we have an emergency response liaison. We joke around that they're little pennies in the system. And so they are just as passionate as I am about this, and they will cascade all that at their city, because we can't be everywhere, and the webinars and teams can only do so much. So having a real person there saying, hey guys, we're going to talk about kits today. Every fridge in every break room has how to build an emergency kit, on a magnet on the fridge. Everyone's got a fridge. So I was like, stick it on there. So yeah, little creative ideas that, we try and make it fun.
That's great.
Well, we have about 5 minutes now for some advice and best practices, if we want to move on to that. And then we do have a few more questions in here, but we'll save those for the end, guys. So we will get you taken care of, I promise.
Yeah, absolutely. So just thinking about the final section here, what are 1 or 2 tips that our audience can apply to their organizations to improve their overall emergency preparedness and crisis response plans? What do you think?
So I definitely think exercises are important. The plans, you can find them online, download them, fill them in if you want, but having that structure, knowing which leaders are going to respond, knowing which ones are you can count on to get you through it. Those exercises are important. It almost sometimes doesn't even matter what your scenario you're testing. It's just that discipline of getting them together to talk through a crisis and knowing what's expected. And then also as a crisis leader, you may not want some players in that room. And so knowing that in advance of a crisis as well. So those are really important. if the next level would be, how do you make it a functional exercise, or how do you make it a full scale? If you can, it definitely takes a lot more time and resources, but it gets more people more involved for a few more hours. So definitely I would say, try and as much as you can to do some tabletops, even if it's an hour.
Yeah. And it seems like another thing I've heard before, this came up in one of my podcasts. Someone said that you really need to empower a lot of people to take action when a disaster happens, because the senior level leader may not be there or can't communicate with you. So it may be a small site you have, and there's someone fairly low down in the organization, but they're boots on the ground and they have no communication with anybody, and they have to feel like it's okay for them to do something instead of just sit around and let things get worse.
100%. Absolutely. We've got to support our leaders out there and the decisions that they're making.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Katie, can I ask this question that came in?
Yeah, go ahead and ask that one, and then we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, this goes back to something that we were discussing earlier, but they said, how do you recommend setting guidelines for responses to questions that you mentioned earlier, like whether someone has power? How does the crisis management team or the company respond to someone who says they're safe, but have no power or water at home? Like, what do you do with that? That's almost a conflicting message.
That's a great question. So what I didn't mention, so we get the results in, and then our team, depending on the severity, if it's, let's just say, a fire situation with evacuations out of California, what we then do with that information is share that with their crew leader, so their leader, and say, hey, you might want to keep an eye on Penny. She's like on the borderline of that fire and evacuations. She's saying she's okay right now, but you may want to like take her off her trips. Like, she might be more worried about her house than flying today. So we push all our responses to our crew leaders. And that helps us as well, right? There's 10 of us, like, and when we're sending out alerts for hundreds, it's hard for us to process all that information. We'll take the most critical, but then we can also cascade the remaining. And then for certain events, we'll look to get like 100% response. In others, we, if they're not responding, they're not responding. At some point, it's like, you've got to call in if you need assistance, and you're impacted. But our crew leaders do get very engaged in this, and they're fantastic. And it helps, right? Because they have base leaders that they have way more people out there. And then it's like, oh, wow, that Penny's my own, I need to take care of her. I want to reach out. And again, that goodwill just keeps carrying on.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. You got to empower people locally to check on the people that they're responsible for. You can't do everything from a central command center. Yeah, very good.
Perfect. Thank you both, Penny and Peter. I just want to launch one final poll before we move on to our audience questions. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So if you could just take 1 minute to let us know, are you interested in learning more about how Alert Media can help you build an all hazards preparedness plan at your organization? So you can tell us yes, and we will happily follow up with you and get you all the information that you need to make that happen. Or you can say no, not at this time. So I'm going to give that just another minute or two while I am getting our audience questions together here. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and end this one now. Perfect. So let's get into this, Penny. Some people would like to know what tools, techniques, or resources are available to help us conduct a risk assessment so that we can know what the top emergencies are for our organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do a hazard risk assessment yearly, and we send it to directors and above and any managers that might be involved in our crisis or emergency response orgs, and ask them, here's the top 50 hazards that could happen to this company, and what impact how ready do you think we are, and what impact do you think this will have on life, what impact will it have on the business, what impact will it have on our facilities. And based on that, we take all those results and we'll spit that back out and say, okay, here's the top 5, 10. That also helps guide us on maybe what tabletop scenarios we should be doing next year and what people are concerned about. Obviously, you can imagine natural disasters and hurricanes have been a hot one, but now pandemic has rose to the top as to what folks are concerned about with hazard risks. So we are actually due for one now, and we'll maybe pull away a little bit from the pandemic and see what the responses are as they come back. But leaders really appreciate being asked that, so that they can also weigh in on, what keeps them up at night.
Do you ever get surprised with the responses that come back? Like, oh, never even thought about that. Or is it pretty de rigueur at this point?
I think the opposite. Aircraft emergency never rises to the top. And you would think that would be like an automatic, but I think we've drilled it so much. We have trained it so much. God, I'm knocking on wood here, but I just think that they're like very like, okay, if it happens, like the team has prepared as a lot for this. So that kind of surprises me and it's it's a good thing, I guess, like that that's not what they're worried about.
Right.
Sometimes there's different ones that pop up that I can't think of any off the top of my head that I'm like, oh, like, something like biochemical, explosion or something. I'm like, oh, okay. I guess we haven't talked about that, or something to that effect.
Right. Someone just watched a really good spy thriller or something and it was top of mind for them.
Yeah, exactly.
So Penny, how does your company provide the resources when an employee needs help?
So lots of different ways. I did mention that we will, in the command center, set up like, what is it that we're going to offer? We have a lot of different resources in the company. And so we will say, hey, if we're going to pay protect, whether we connect them with our crisis fund, which will give them cash because of the crisis, whether we put them up in hotels and how many nights are we offering. So the crisis team will determine, hey, here's what we recommend. And then we will push that out to crew leaders so that when they engage with so we've sent the alert out, we've got the responses, we now know who's most critical based on what we've received. We can then work with the crew leaders to say, hey, here's what we can offer. We have a block of hotel rooms over at this hotel if they'd like to go there, or hey, they just want to be flown to LA and stay at their mom's, whatever the case may be. Everyone's a little different in what their needs are. Some folks are like, I'm just running out of food. Can somebody make a food delivery? Things like that. So it varies, and it varies from event to event, because a New York response of 7,000 plus, employees or crew members that we have in the area, it definitely varies, on what we can do and what we can offer.
Gotcha. And then this is sort of a similar question. How are you able to utilize the 50 care team members in Puerto Rico without straining the limited resources locally?
So we had obviously reduced our flights, right? So the only flights that were coming in were for relief efforts. So it was those planes were coming in and just bringing supplies. We weren't really flying in customers as much. So we shouldn't be hindering the operation in any way. If anything, we're just helping. If we're out there, we're throwing bags, it's because we're just helping them out.
Yeah.
The 50 crew members that came down, went on to different shifts, and we rented out it used to be a ballroom of a hotel that was on airport property, and we converted into our own Costco or BJ's, and just kept bringing in supplies and allowing because you couldn't get anything. There was, they ran out of supplies immediately, food supplies. So we were able to provide that for them. So those 50 care team members till this day are so appreciative of being able to be down there to help. And so one trick that we did learn is wherever FEMA's staying, that's the hotel you want to stay at, because not have a power. So we were able to get in with the FEMA hotel, and our care team members were okay. We didn't take any hotel rooms away from any of the folks that may have needed them. We made sure that everybody was taken care of before we send in teams.
Gotcha. Do you have different plan guidelines for different countries?
Great question. So, I think from the business continuity side, it's the same, right? Whether it's an IT outage or an emergency, civil unrest, we fly to Haiti. We've seen what's, played out recently there. So the process from that side is the same. From an aircraft emergency perspective, not every country we fly to have, I would say the majority do not have any legislation when it comes to how do you support the victims or the families after an accident. So we take what we have here in the US and try to apply it as much as we can in any country that we fly to.
And then I think we have time for one more question. Should all employees be aware of the emergency response plan, or just those who are in the crisis management team or department?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have e-learnings. There is our emergency response 101 is open to everyone in the company. Now there's certain staff members or crew members that have to take the course. So if you're out at the airports, they have to take the course. But that program is open to everyone so that you understand also what it builds confidence knowing that all this has been put in place at your company. Then if you take ER 102, that's way more in depth, and that's more for our responder. So, what should you pack? What should you tell your family? Should you deploy or not deploy? Here are some criteria, the legislation. There's a little bit more involved for the responders course that they need to take. So we do promote putting it out there. I will say that we recently got some new senior leaders that joined JetBlue. And, I had done a one-on-one briefing, like I mentioned earlier, and said, hey, let's sit down, let's go through the program. And she's like, why is this not an orientation? This is, so like, I don't know why it's not an orientation. So we may be cascading it now in orientation as well. But I was like taken back. I'm like, I never thought of that. So yes, we do promote it. We're not shy that, we don't keep this hidden or anything. This is out there.
Gotcha. Well, that is all the time that we have for questions today. But if we didn't get to yours, I'm about to offer some additional resources and then also Penny and Peter's contact information so we can make sure that you get the answers that you are looking for. So we do have all of these free resources at Alert Media that are on all hazards preparedness. So I do invite you to go to the resources page of alertmedia.com to find a wealth of information. So podcast episodes, blog posts, product and feature guides, and other useful tools. And while you're there, I do recommend that you subscribe to the Employee Safety Podcast that we mentioned earlier. And Penny's episode is still one of our top performing episodes. So I know you're going to find a lot of great value in that, as well as our other episodes. So as promised, here is some contact information for Penny and Peter if you do want to just follow up with them after this or connect with them. So you can go ahead and take note of that. And then at this time, Penny and Peter, I just want to thank you both for your time. This has just been such an enlightening conversation. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights and expertise.
Yes, thank you, Penny.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, this does conclude our presentation today. We want to keep it within the allotted time that we promised. So thank you for taking us the time to join us today. And just a reminder, we will be sending out a link to the recording once it's available. So you'll have that for your reference, and you are welcome, to share that with other members of your team as well, which someone did ask in the question. So yes, please share it. And that is about it for us. So thank you all. We hope you have a great afternoon and stay safe out there.